I'm delighted to welcome you on the second event of the Interculturality for Diversity and Global Learning Research Group, which I lead jointly with Dr. Juliana Ferry. After the launch of the Interculturality event in June, a very successful event, we decided to organize a second event. So today, we're delighted to have with us Professor Zhu Hua, who is the Chair of Educational Linguistics at the University of Birmingham. A very warm welcome. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation. We're delighted to have you here with us today, and we very much look forward to your very, very interesting presentation entitled Turning the Table: How can Interculturality Research help us to challenge othering? Othering, I have to say, is very close to my heart, and I have published extensively on othering. We look forward to your presentation. While Juliana is admitting more people, I'm going to say a little bit about your work, if that's okay, and then you can start the talk, which will be about 30-35 minutes, so that then we have time for questions. Just before I say a little bit about Professor Zhu Hua, I'd like to inform everyone about the fact that we are recording, okay? So I hope that's okay with everyone. What we're going to do is to follow exactly the same process as last time during the launch. After the presentation, we'll take questions, and I'd be grateful if you put your questions, if you add your questions in the chat box so we can monitor, okay? I will be chairing today the presentation, and then Juliana obviously will be keeping an eye, well, we'll both be keeping an eye on the questions, all right? And please make sure that you have your microphones switched off so that there isn't any disruption in terms of sound. So if you just bear with me while I'm sharing the bio that I have on my screen. Yes. Professor Zhu Hua is Chair of Educational Linguistics in School of Education, University of Birmingham, and Director of the MOSAIC Group for Research in Multilingualism. She's Fellow of Academy of Social Sciences, the UK, and Fellow of the International Academy for Intercultural Research. Her main research interests span across multilingual and intercultural communication and child language. Among her recent publications are Exploring Intercultural Communication, Language in Action, Experience in Chinese Education, Learning of Language and Culture by International Students in Chinese Universities, Changing Faces of Transnational Communities in Britain, a special issue of the International Journal of the Sociology of Language, and Translating Culture in Global Times. All right. So if that's okay with everyone, we'll make a start. Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Maria and Juliana, for your invitation. I'm delighted to be part of. I didn't know I'm the second one, so delighted to be the second one after your exciting roundtable, which I watched on the YouTube. So thank you to Maria's kind introduction. The topic of the theme of your research group is very much close to my heart, not only in terms of my research interest, but also in terms of my personal experience. I have lived and worked in China and UK, and this year marked, I have spent exactly half my year, entire my life, equally divided in China and in UK. So the topic today is turning the tables. How can interculturality research help us to challenge discourse of othering? In the quote, Frank Wu, the first Asian American law professor at Howard University Law School, talked about his experience about the perpetual foreigner syndrome, a problem facing many Asian Americans in everyday social interactions. I guess this is not just actually relevant to Asian American, but maybe close to many people here joining us here today. He made a point about how discrimination against a group of people is instantiated through recurrent and seemingly innocent questions such as, where are you really from? This kind of discrimination he discussed could be described as a discourse of benign racism, a kind of a racism which is routinized and inconspicuous, nevertheless reproduce and reify differences and result in othering. So in this presentation, I will focus on this kind of a discourse of a benign racism and examine how interculturality research can contribute to turning the tables. So some clarifications on the terms I'm using here. In my work, I have defined the discourse as an applied linguist. I have actually used these terms, such as define the discourse, such as where are you really from, as nationality and ethnicity talk. Some of you may have come across these discourse before, the questions such as where are you people coming from? What is it like back home? When are you going back? Your English is so good. What's your real name? Or your name is so difficult, these kind of conversation. So why does this nationality and ethnicity talk matter? First of all, because it reflects hidden and flawed folk theories of race. Folk theories of race is a term used by Hale to describe everyday assumption people have about race and ethnicity. So here is a conversation, and there are some folk theories in action. So when somebody asks you, where are you from? The folk theory behind is, you look a bit brown. Why are you brown? No, where are you really from? When they ask again, you're clearly telling me untruths. Brown people do not live in London. And so where are your family from? Like back in the day, the folk theory we can see is people who come from African and American do not look like you. So what we have seen is the folk theory. There are certain kind of expectations and norms people use and assumptions people apply in everyday communication. And because these kind of folk theories, we all have, by the way, these kind of folk theories, they're often taken for granted and on some occasions almost invisible to those who apply them and those who are at the receiving end. People tend to use them to interpret the world without a second thought. Despite their invisible nature, folk theories of race often carry with them traces and also feed in larger ideological construct about race and ethnicity circulated in society. Secondly, why NET matters, because it reproduce discourse of benign racism, a kind of racism I mentioned before, which is routinized and invisible, but reproduce and reify differences and result in otherings. Othering occurs when an individual or group of people is denied a clearly defined status, when an individual or group of people is designated as anonymous, peculiar, or deviant, or a virus even, and they are objectified, stereotyped, naturalized, or essentialized. So how can we develop a nuanced understanding of how this kind of discourse works and what we can do, what can we do to challenge this kind of conversation? One strand work I have found very helpful is interculturality as interaction research. I will explain what I mean by the interculturality as interaction research and what it's about. So the interculturality as interaction research I'm talking about is a new and emerging line of investigation. It pays attention to the inter-nature of interaction. So as a line of investigation, it seeks to interpret how participants make aspect their identities, in particular cultural identities, relevant or irrelevant to interactions through interactional resources. So not just actually making relevant, but most importantly, they can make it irrelevant. For example, these labels, so use Japanese, Chinese, English, American. So it draws from the constructivist paradigm and argues that intercultural differences and cultural memberships are socially constructed. Specifically, it departs from seeing cultural identity and membership as from being to doing, something people make relevant through interactions. The focus is on the process of interaction and what the participants achieve out of the experience in terms of new values, identities, and practices. In terms of methodology, it draws from conversation analysis, ethnomethodology, and interactional social linguistics. And as many of you know already, the term interculturality has many meanings and means different things to different people. There are several alternative use of interculturality I have come across, and I think it's useful to clarify what they are and how my line of research, interculturality as interaction, fits in with them. So the first type is what I call inter versus cross. Interculturality is used as a shorthand or normalization for things intercultural, such as the term we have come across and perhaps on a daily basis. People talk about intercultural learning, intercultural encounters, intercultural education, intercultural experience. The second type is inter versus multi. It refers to intercultural interaction and active engagement between different cultural groups and communities. And when talking about different ways of managing diversity in Europe, it is often used in contrast with multiculturalism, i.e. coexistence of cultural groups and communities. The third usage takes on a critical perspective influenced by cultural, critical, and feminist studies, race and ethnic studies, among others. And one example is Fred Derwin's work on interculturality in education, in which he argues inter translates best what the intercultural could be about. It's about interaction, context, recognition, power relations, the inevitable combination of simple and complex, intersectionality, etc. So there are several threads within interculturality as interaction studies. The first one is how cultural identities are made relevant through discourse. I put down some examples of studies. One of the worth mentioning is Nishijeka's seminal work, which talks about how to be a Japanese with words. The second thread is what interculturality as interaction does or achieves. It helps to construct membership, build relationship, and mediate conflict. The third one is how interculturality helps to understand dynamics within groups otherwise researched as a one homogeneous group. And this actually includes my own work looking at diaspora family intergenerational differences. And the last one, which is the focus of the talk, is how can interculturality challenge the status quo of power inequality, discourse of othering, and turning the table. As you see, the last strand here I'm talking about is actually very close to the third type of interculturality, which takes a more critical perspective of interculturality, looking at cultural identity in situ, but also considering the historical political context where the interaction takes place. Specifically, interculturality as interaction studies offers an analytical tool to understand what participants do with cultural memberships, labels we use, for example, British, American, Chinese, Japanese, Korean. So what people do, we talk about in terms of research, these are essentialized label, but we hear it in every day. If you go to Tesco, you see the supermarket aisles marked by Chinese, Polish, American food. What they mean, how these circulated discourse in the public, how do we actually people do with these cultural labels? So first thing I would say, people do and negotiate cultural identities through a range of interaction work and discursive practice. And this is where applied linguistics can work very nicely to provide analytical tools and focus to see how interaction work and discourses can contribute, can help people negotiate cultural identities. And I mentioned conversation like, where are you from? This kind of nationality and ethnicity talk is regarded one of the interaction resources. And in our conversation, we constantly casting people into categories through indexical and symbolic cues such as audible, visible, readable cues of ethnicity. And that's just one of the things people do. People rely, for example, on accent, your name, and how you your name on paper, and how you look to figure out who you are. And recipient, but the most actually relevant for today's talk is I want to talk about how recipient can choose to align with and resist or ignore cultural identities invoked by these cues. So on the right side of the slide is a visual demonstration. What can be negotiated and challenged by participants is the extent of alignment or misalignment between identities ascribed by others and self-oriented identities. So the dynamic between the self and others in conversation. The next, we're going to watch a video clip. Just a bit of warning, we have tried before the session, but the sound may vary depending whether you wear earphone or not. If you wear earphone, the sound may come across too loud for you. So just a bit of warning, you may want to adjust the volume on your computer to make yourself comfortable. It's a video clip that demonstrates how nationality and ethnicity talk and interculturality in action. It's about 2 minutes. In the video, the man is trying to strike up a conversation with an Asian-looking young woman who's doing exercise. And there is a subtitle on the screen, I hope.
Hi there.
Hi.
Nice day, huh?
Yeah, finally, right?
Where are you from? Your English is perfect.
San Diego. We speak English there.
Oh, no. Where are you from?
Well, I was born in Orange County, but I never actually lived there.
I mean before that.
Before I was born.
Yeah, like, well, where are your people from?
Well, my great-grandma was from Seoul.
Korean. I knew it. I was like, she's either Japanese or Korean, but I was leaning more towards Korean.
Amazing.
Hamshasina. There's a really good teriyaki barbecue place near my apartment. So I actually really like kimchi.
Cool. What about you? Where are you from?
San Francisco.
But where are you from?
Oh, I'm just American.
Really? You're Native American?
No, just regular American. Oh, well, I guess my grandparents are from England.
Oh, well. Hello, Governor! What's all this then? Top of the morning to you. Let's get a sporty. Double, toil and trouble. Mind the gap, beware Jack the Ripper. Bloody hell! Pip, cheerio! I think your people's fish and chips are amazing.
You're weird.
Really? I'm weird? Must be a Korean thing.
So I hope you joined the video. So what happening during the video? Let's look at how people do the cultural membership and how do people assist others in looking the conversation in turn. So in the video, as you see, the man who was actually surprised by the woman's English began to look for the answer he was hoping for by asking questions one by one. Where are you from? Your English is perfect. Where are your people from? So these are the NET talk we mentioned before. These NET presumably driven by his folk theories towards Asian-looking people in this conversation. His comment, your English is perfect, in turn 5, despite being a compliment, positioned the Asian-looking woman as a non-native English speaker, therefore a foreigner, someone who doesn't belong to an English-speaking country like the US. The NET talks are accompanied by his further casting in turn 7 through his speech adjustment and rendition of patronizing what we call foreigner talk, where people go out of your way to slow down or emphasize every syllable in the question. As you see in one of the turns, he was trying to slow down. Where are you from? Slowing down every single syllable. In turn 13, he was thinking aloud and talk about his categorization, which seemed to rely upon the woman's physical appearance. In the last turn on the slide, the guy was trying to display his cultural assumptions about Korean. It came across as some really random stuff, barbecue, and also he talked about a Korean phrase meaning thank you, but used it as a very tokenistic way. So these cultural assumption references are very superficial and essentialized, reflecting his flawed folk theory of race. So how does a woman respond and challenge this kind of ascription? As we see, the woman made several attempts to resist the man's positioning. She used the first person plural pronoun we in turn 6 to depersonalize the matter. This is in contrast with the emphasis on your people, a plural address term used by the man in turn 11. In turn 8, she ignored the man's ascription of non-native English speaker, i.e. foreigners who need to be spoken to slowly. He provides an account of her connection with Orange County in an attempt to routinize the conversation, bring the conversation back on track. It didn't work. So she employed the discourse marker in turn 12. Things like little words, well, is a kind of discourse marker to indicate her reluctance to be drawn into this kind of discourse. And as we see in turn 10, she rephrased the man's question and brings a bit of sarcasm and a bit of humor into the conversation. Her flat tone accompanying the word amazing in turn 14 displayed her stance of resistance. So what she's trying to do here clearly is trying to dismiss the relevance of categories of Asian-looking people as equivalent to foreigners who speak poor English. And perhaps the best part of the conversation is actually in the second half, where the women turns the tables. In turns 16 to 18 on the slide, you may have noticed she mirrors the men's discourse strategies in ascribing the memberships. She slows down every syllable of the word from, but this is actually play on clearly, because in reality, when people slow down, people wouldn't actually slow down the preposition from, which is a relatively useless word in conversation, but she deliberately plays on this silly move. She also plays on the meaning of Native American. So that's actually forced men to answer, oh, I'm just a regular American. In turns 25 and 27, she mocks the British way of speaking, essentializing Englishness, and deliberately categorizing men as your people. This is exactly turning the table, as the man has actually talked about your people before. And in turn 27, she self-essentializes herself as a Korean when she said, oh, it must be Korean thing. And we will talk about self-essentialization as strategy in a couple of slides later. So what we have seen here is the constructed conversation demonstrate several ways of turning the table in challenging othering, which I have to say in research, we don't really talk very often about, we talk about not to microaggression and not to other in the conversation, but we don't really talk about what happens, what do you do if you encounter this kind of conversation. And some people will say, oh, take it up to the Twitter. Probably that's one way, but in the everyday conversation, when you come across these racist discourse of benign racism, what do you do? And these are some suggestions. As you see, you can dismiss the relevance of category, ethnifying the ethnifier, meaning assigning cultural memberships to the people who assign membership in the first place. So this is exactly turning the table, mocking, self-essentializing. So by self-essentializing is Spivak's term when he was talking about people's attempt to temporarily essentialize themselves in order to achieve certain goals. Research has shown that sometimes racialized and more minoritized people have to emphasize their ethnicity in order to achieve their goals. And in my own ethnography of a London-based artist, originally from Poland, as a part of a translanguaging project, doing a Polish artist, I found that the artist also sometimes employed this strategy in going about her identities. So on the slide is a picture of my artist who, as a research participant, she, as someone with a Polish background, she often gets a call from her agent when they're looking for Polish or Russian nurse or cleaning lady. But she recently played a Polish nurse in 2 episodes of EastEnders, actually. While she doesn't like, being typecast in a particular role, she recognized that this is most likely to be her niche. However, the problem, as she articulated in this interview, which I have actually put an extract on the slide, is like playing a stereotypical Polish person only reifies the stereotypes. Facing these challenges, the artist maneuvers strategically and plays along with the identities ascribed to her. In this interview, she talked about introducing herself as I'm just a Polish actress, self-jokingly, when she meets other members of film cast. When people were asked to introduce themselves, she said, I'm just a Polish actress. That kind of strategy is self-essentializing, to essentialize themselves in order to achieve their interaction goals. Here, clearly, the artists want to send a strong message to the film crew. So in terms of bigger picture, we have seen through the interculturality as interaction research is, as Marx and Moore argue in their review of the 8 common conversations about race, race is not something that people have or are, but rather a set of actions that people do. Doing race always involves creating groups based on perceived physical and behavior characteristics associating differential power and privilege with these characteristics, and then justifying the resulting inequality. And the language as a powerful and influential social agent in constructing social interaction and relationship is exactly one of the actions whereby people do race, among other things. In the Nationality and Ethnicity Talk as interaction resources for interculturality, we see the mechanism of construction of social relations, an act of othering and resistance. Perhaps more important is how we resist discourse for othering here. And people, through this interculturality as interaction, people subjectively position us versus others by questioning and challenging entitlement, authenticity, and legitimacy, as well as claiming these entitlement, authenticity, and legitimacy. So all these are very important notions to identity and identification. On the slide is another example of how language can divide people. The same news story about GCSE success of immigrant children in math and English was reported last February, but we have two versions here. And one of them delegitimizes immigrant children and pays them against local children, which are described as native speakers. So interculturality as interaction research, interaction studies, as I have outlined here, demonstrate how discourse of othering works, and more importantly, what we can do to challenge this kind of discourse. So where do we go from here? Here's a couple of suggestions from me. They're not meant to be comprehensive. This is much about the joint effort and also a conversation and we need to continue to have. But just a couple of suggestions from me based on the talk here today is the first step is to recognize the discourse of othering and choose and negotiate the best local strategy to turn the tables to one's advantage. Second, as educators and researchers, we should help our students and learners to develop symbolic competence. Symbolic competence is a term proposed by Claire Kramsch, who we have collaborated over a period of time. It refers to the ability to frame and reframe the distribution of power to shape the very context in which the language is learned and used through the learners and users' embodied history and subjectivity. Specifically, symbolic competence consists of knowing when to speak and when to remain silent, when to talk about the inequality of the ongoing talk and when to let them pass, when to complain or counterattack, and when to gently but unmistakably readjust the balance of power through humor or irony. So I'll finish the talk with some pictures from a campaign called I Too Am Oxford campaign, in which Oxford student color speak out. Just because I'm Black doesn't mean I'm Barack. English is my first language. How did you get into the Oxford? Jamaicans don't study. And are you here on the access scheme? These just a few of the powerful pictures of students of color attending Oxford University, speaking up their experience about being minoritized and racialized as Black Asian Americans, Black and Asian students in education. So if you're interested to find out a bit more about the talk, particularly interculturality research, here are some key references. Some of the data are based on the article I published in 2016 in an article called Where Are You Really From? A Nationality and Ethnicity Talk in Everyday Interactions. And I have my email on the slide. And any comments is welcome. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Zhu. I mean, a fascinating talk. Thank you very much. Thank you. I think we've got time for questions, and I also like to have a look at the chat because I've seen some very interesting comments here. I mean, obviously everybody liked your clip. I don't think there could have been a better way to describe what most of us have experienced, actually, as you know, foreigners or migrants or ethnic minority members of staff and students. So I'll just see what's actually in the chat. So yes, brilliant video. I quite like the comment about children of immigrants or immigrant children. What does that mean? Better than classmates? Aren't the children of immigrants also classmates? Well, I would also add, aren't the children of immigrants British? So why this categorization as the other, the foreign? So let's see, what else have we got here?
It is really interesting comments, really about the children, the immigrants against the classmate. It is actually, it really shows how the use of labels and categorizations in terms of conversation analysis, how important these labels are and what are hidden agendas. And then even sounds in very innocent comments, choice of words can result in marginalization and also cause tension.
Yeah.
And there are lots of work actually among corpus linguists who actually does the corpus work to understand why certain words are used with certain nouns to describe a particular group of people, and how does media, what role media plays in marginalizing and demonizing some groups, for example.
Yeah. And just go further up. Sorry, if I missed something, please let me know. I think someone, we've got Marcella from Brisbane. Thank you very much for joining us. Okay, we've got people from Limerick in Ireland. And I think Michelle shared a popular Irish Limerick a song from a Limerick singer. Thank you very much for that. Thank you. Okay. Everybody likes your clip. Yes. Okay. I'll just read a comment. I'm not sure it's a question. So the theories underlying your arguments, specifically those pertaining to your interpretation and application of othering, are exclusively Marxist. Yeah. I think you should answer this.
It's an interesting question. I actually never consult Marxist work when I actually prepare. So I'm not clear about whether this is actually in alignment with Marxist. But certainly when we talk about the third type of interculturality studies, I put it on the slide, looking at the critical perspective. Some of the work there actually has the researcher have made it clear it was actually strongly influenced by the Marxist ideologies. But I don't think anything critical in terms of critical discourse analysis is Marxist. So we actually need to be careful to encode the both. I don't think there are strong relevance. The Marxist theory has a strong relevance to what we are talking here today. But I think there are also other theories that actually we need to refer to here. Okay. I don't know whether I answered your question here.
Right. Well, I can't see. Yeah, I mean, I'll keep looking at the chat. I just want to, there's a new message. Yes, thank you. Okay, yeah, I think that's fine. There was an interesting comment earlier on from Gida Lutra. If I may share this, in my first teaching post in a predominantly white school in Hayes, I was often asked this question as head of English. Interesting that an Asian with perfect grammar is head of English. Well, again, that's a very interesting comment. I don't want, if you want to make a comment on that comment, Zhu.
That's exactly kind of a nationality and ethnicity talk. We actually, I'm concerned about this kind of subtle, but sort of like people feel they are entitled to ask, challenge particular one's role together with, in connection with their ethnicity background. And that kind of a nationality and ethnicity talk, exactly the things we need to look out for and know how to resist or challenge this kind of discourse for othering. So I wonder, Gita, what you say how did you respond when you were asked this question? If you like to, but you don't, please don't feel you have to respond to this question. Maybe personal.
I was a very young, kind of early stage teacher at the time, and I don't think I actually had the language or the confidence to challenge at the time, but I would today, knowing what I know. But I was just really taken back that somebody even asked me that question. And I felt like I'd gone back to, the times when my parents first came here. So I felt quite overwhelmed, but it wasn't first time I was asked that. It was basically, how have you got this promotion so quickly as a brown woman when you've only been here a year? And you also speak perfect English and write perfectly. So yeah, I think I was taken back that my credentials were questioned in that way. But it's only years later, I'd say, as you develop the language or the meta-language and that understanding, that you realise how these traumas live in your body for years to come.
That's just really beautiful comment about the experience lots of people have when they have encountered these kind of comments. They may not say anything, but then these accumulate over time, and you do need to develop and it takes certain courage to stand up and to say this is actually not right, to resist and challenge that kind of conversation. I also, in some of my other work, I also come across this kind of internalized inferiority that some of the students of colors and colleagues of a BAME background have actually talked about. They didn't realize how, what sense of inferiority they have internalized over the years by, through accepting these kind of comments. And that's actually also a very interesting area to look at, and also important area, I think, to look into, and how people of colors and BAME background, as described here, can also learn to challenge this and stand up to themselves.
Thank you. If I may add at this point, because I quite liked actually what Geeta said about credentials being challenged, or excellence being challenged, even actually when the evidence suggests otherwise. And this has certainly been my experience as a migrant, non-English academic. So I just wanted to say that, I mean, in my experience, talk around one's origin is never innocuous. So it's not really, I mean, my experience has never been a genuine interest to find out about, one's culture or background. It's always an opportunity where, symbolic power is mobilized actually to do race and to do difference. So that's one thing I want to say. And the other thing is about resistance, because obviously that's another issue that came through your talk very strongly. And there are various ways of resistance. And here I just want to talk about a little bit about resistance as silence. And I think we have with us Gunjan Vada, who has written, who has developed some fascinating work actually around resistance as silence. And this is certainly one position that I have always taken. I don't normally engage in these conversations because, as I said, I mean, they're never innocuous. And there is always, an attempt to use the space or the opportunity to mobilize symbolic or even actual violence in an attempt to do, difference or to perform hegemonic identities, whether racial, ethnic, or gender identities. So I was wondering if the audience has, anyone in the audience has any thoughts about or experiences that they might to share about resistance. And also, I don't know if Gunjan is still with us, if she'd like to.
I think, Maria, one interesting comment is about speaking out, this idea of speaking out.
Yes, okay, sorry, I've missed that. Yes, go on.
So someone says there are costs to speaking out. So maybe sometimes it's rational not to challenge. And Geeta says there are costs and consequences to speaking
Absolutely.
out. So this idea that speaking out is something that can be very challenging. And Baobia says not feeling safe about speaking
yes.
out. So this idea that, there are costs associated to speaking out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And also wanted to ask as well about language insecurity and language anxiety that second language speakers have as well in regards to being in native speaker spaces where also being othered linguistically creates a sense of anxiety and insecurity as well. That can be quite crippling too for non-native speakers.
That's all very interesting comments. I don't know if anybody wants to actually further comment on these or elaborate. But just really one thought when people talking about the burden of speaking out. I think that's one of the really challenging issues. I totally agree. And in these kind of encounters, the burden of adaptation, intercultural encounters, the burden, adaptation, accommodation very often sort of falls upon the victim side, the recipient end, the recipient, and those on the receiving end. And I think the comments people put there made me think about maybe, yes, there are needs to do what we are doing here, set up these kind of like supported channel network. We can actually support these and recognize these conversations, the marginalization effect of these conversations, and then to make people aware, as well as developing. I think the really important message here is really in the education and in the training, we often talk about competence, but then competence as it's defined now isn't enough. What we need is symbolic competence, the skills to actually understand this critical understanding of what's going on, and the ability to be able to shape and reshape the conversation in a direction to your advantage. It sounds really like an ideal situation to be, but it takes a lot of skills and training and awareness. And also, as people comment, it is a hard thing to do because it is a delicate balance between being a nice person, being sort of a nice, good citizen, versus actually being vocal and somebody who fight for your own entitlement.
Thank you, Zhu. Thank you. Well, as I can see from the comments, well, apparently, being in a safe space and, feeling comfortable to challenge some of these stereotypical and other discourses, that's very important. And the difficulty, of course, of speaking out and not speaking out. Yes,
there's an interesting comment, Maria.
Go on.
Says, speaking out can also amplify the othering complex amongst those othered, where it is challenged by the oppressors.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. That's from Min. Thank you very much for that, Min. Thank you. I'm just seeing if I've missed anything. Shireen, is there something you'd like to add? I can see a few comments here. Maybe a question?
Yeah, thanks very much. I mean, it makes me think a lot about, I do work on gender inequality, and this, do you draw attention to yourself or not draw attention to yourself? You're actually walking a tightrope, aren't you? And I think it's quite similar, because speaking out on an individual, I think there's a mismatch between the levels, isn't there? Because at an individual level, it's much better to stay under the radar, I think, or perhaps speaking out can be a strategy to advancement, but then you're making yourself very vulnerable in the process, aren't you? So, but yet, if we don't speak out at a group, if no one speaks up, then nothing changes, does it?
Yeah. Thank you for that, Shireen. Thank you. Let's see, another.
There is a question
from Do you want to?
From Vasiliki. It says, what about values as part of symbolic competence? It would be important not only to prepare a person with skills to resist, but to create an environment where otherness does not exist.
Vasiliki, would you like to say a little bit more about that, perhaps? You're still with us?
Yes, I'm here. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yes, because we are having this, this discussion about competence and education, and the importance of preparing, the future members of society with important skills around otherness and how to resist it. What about what types of values actually should be present in an educational environment that will prevent otherness from existing in the first place?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think the question of values is a very important one and requires more attention. But can I just bring one other point very quickly? I know we haven't got time to go into that in detail, but that's I mean, that question to everyone, to Zhu and everyone, really. I was thinking about wider or bigger discourses and constructed truths, and in particular some of the state or government discourse around naturalization. I mean, some of you who perhaps have gone through the naturalization process, as I did, to become a British citizen, might be familiar with that discourse. And I was just wondering, in addition to the day-to-day, everyday interactions and talk, there's also the wider discourses, othering discourses that are actually implicate us all in some form of discursive violence or symbolic violence. So I think there's two levels. There's obviously the conversations we have every day in work, but there's also all those kind of wider discourses that are so much embedded in the cultures that we live in and work. I mean, I don't know, Zhu, if you'd like to maybe comment on that, or if you have any thoughts about that.
Yes, I think these symbolic violence unfortunately happens all the time, and I think we do need to look ways to seeking them out and talking about them, not actually sweeping them under the carpet through organization, association, and also exactly this kind of forum, and also through our research, our own research, and then teaching to talk about the wrongness or the underlying the marginalization through these discourses. And these actually really signal important part of discourse, not just actually sort of as everyday interaction, but also wider micro discourse structures. And just to throw in another example, you talk about the naturalization, and absolutely that's actually the area. Lots of questions there don't really make sense. I think most people who have gone through that experience would agree with me. Some of the questions, perhaps Boris Johnson himself, who doesn't even know the answer. And in fact, as a matter of fact, we know David Cameron couldn't answer one of the questions published as a handbook for the citizen test. And I think these things really requires political awareness and debates. Another example is for example, the census we have actually done. And I don't know whether people noticed the questions about the languages. There is a questions about what languages you speak. And English is down the main option, and other languages you need to click other. So what is signal is this is the monolingual society with English as a dominant language, while we know English is only one of more than 300 languages spoken in Britain. I think that's a kind of a political decision people usually made at top without consultation and not listening, because this is the same question we have signaled back in 2011. We had a national debate and talk about why and why not recognizing other languages apart from English in Britain. They clearly didn't listen. So we're repeating this kind of conversation again. But then nevertheless, I think people are more aware this time. As soon as the census were published, I have actually certainly seen social media campaign and debates about the problem with these questions. So I think we are making some progress, even though the progress is only in small step.
Thank you for that. Thank you, and thank you all for your very interesting comments and your contributions.
Maria, there's a hand. There's someone.
Yeah, just very. Yes. Yes.
Oh, yeah. So sorry, I can't find that button. But yeah, Zhu, I just wanted to ask you about that last point, because I thought it would really help to understand it better, actually. Because they asked people about English, did they? And then what did the people say? That they, because I think probably most people in Britain are, probably a high proportion are native English speakers, aren't they? English, not native, maybe English first language.
Yes, I think the assumption, the assumption is that English is the main dominant language. But when they asking the question like that, they forgot. For many people, English isn't their home language. We have people speaking their heritage language at home, not necessarily at school. We also have immigrants who actually do not speak English. So that's actually when you're not asking the right question, you don't really get the right answer. And that's really in terms of technicality, but also in terms of political recognition, you minoritize you actually don't really give them legitimate status to those languages we know spoken around in the UK.
Yeah, but I don't know about it. Maybe, I know that I'm being politically really incorrect to say this, but, my grandmother moved here in the 1950s. For 50 years, she lived in Britain, and she never learned to speak English. But, surely if you live in Britain, you could learn to speak English. I don't know. Having a common language has really unified many countries. For example, Italy, I think it was the introduction of a standard language. I think they also did that in China, introducing the standard Chinese. It's been pretty important, hasn't it, to the growth of the nation? So
it's one way of looking at it. It has also been used to divide populations. But I think this is a very interesting conversation. But I'm really sorry, we'll have to leave it at that. We'll have the presentation will be available on our website in the comments. And please contact Juliana Ferry if you want to join our circulation list, and stay in touch. It was lovely having you, Zhu. I think we had a very interesting discussion. Thank you all for your contributions and your comments. And I'm really sorry we haven't got more time to go into detail in all sorts of interesting issues, but we have another meeting. But thank you, and please keep in touch with the Interculturality for Diversity and Global Learning group. Thank you very much. Thank you. And
just wanted to add very quickly, Maria, that the website is in the chat, but also I've just added my email address in case anyone wants to get in touch with me to know more about the group. But all of you who expressed an interest are in the mailing list.
Juliana,
so thank you all.
Sorry, Juliana, can you save the chat for me?
Yes, we will.
Yes. Thank you.
Yes.
Oh, yes. Thank you. I will do.
We will. And also, I just wanted to say a big thank you also to those who shared personal experiences, because I can understand, certainly from my own personal experience, how difficult that can be sometimes. Okay, thank you. All right, see you all. Bye-bye. Have a good day.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.